Next, we're going to move on to a panel of community members who I'll be calling up their names, and they'll be joining us on a panel here. So, Hassan Mahmoud, Abdurrahman Ibrahim, Faisal Isa, and Abdurrahman Ahmed.
Country is geographically located in a very strategic position of World Trade paths destined to East Africa, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and the Far East. All these ships load from Europe, from the United States East Coast, and they come through the Suez Canal and the strategic Bab el-Mandeb. That is where Somaliland is located. It can be argued that because of this strategic location, the British government at the time chose to give protection to Somaliland in 1884, thereafter known as the Somaliland British Protectorate. Therefore, I will speak briefly from the period of 1884 to 1991, and thereafter my colleagues will take from there. I will try to be brief but informative. During this period, Somaliland had its ups and downs. The protection period extended from 1884 to June 1960, except for a brief period of about 6 months when the Italians overran Somaliland, and that was in 1940. At that time, about 7,000 British officials and civilians were evacuated to Aden. The British and the Somaliland forces drove out the Italians in March 1941 during Operation Appearance. It is worth noting that in this war, Somaliland forces, which I can claim that my late father was a sergeant, were fighting alongside the British Army, while the Somalis in the south were in the same trench with the Mussolini forces. Mogadishu at that time was in the wrong camp. The period after the World War II was a time when what was known as the winds of change were blowing over Africa. Somaliland was no exception. In April 1960, the Legislative Council of British Somaliland passed a resolution requesting independence, and in May 1960, the British government stated that it was prepared to grant independence to the then Somaliland Protectorate. On June 26, 1960, Her Majesty's government granted independence to the Somaliland state. Immediately, 35 nations, including the 5 permanent Security Council members, recognized the Somaliland state as a sovereign nation. However, unfortunately, this fanfare did not last long. Our fathers, who were very much interested in pursuing the dream of great Somali state, encompassing all the 5 territories inhabited by ethnic Somalis, went into an unholy marriage with the South, with Mogadishu, which was a trust territory by the United Nations under Italian administration on the 1st of June 1960 to form the Somali Republic. And that's why I was saying that from that day on, the Somaliland name, the Somaliland territory, was sort of wiped out from the map. And it was only a figure 7, which was named Somalia, which came into being. At this point, I want to clarify 2 points. It was representatives from Somaliland who had discussions with representatives from Somalia prior to attaining the independence on June 26. it was agreed that an act of union, and that is the important part of what I'm saying, it was agreed that an act of union was to be signed by both parties, and that this document to be in the future of an international agreement between two states. The Legislative Assembly of the Independent State of Somaliland signed the act on the 27th of June in 1960, but it was never signed by the representatives of Somalia. Instead, the legislative members of Somalia met on the 30th of June 1960 to approve in principle an act of union in Italian language. That act of union was significantly different from the one signed by Somaliland. This act of union was never ratified, and it was never enacted into law. And they still claim that we are part of that union. It was never ratified, neither ratified nor enacted into law. In 1961, there were young graduates from Sandhurst College, officers from Sandhurst College in here, who, when they saw the problems that was facing the fledgling Somaliland nation, they tried to rectify things. But the government at the time saw that these people were engaged in a coup d'etat, and they were all arrested and imprisoned and accused of high treason. However, the case fell apart when a British judge ruled that the union was not valid at all, and the union between Somalia and Somaliland was not valid, and they were acquitted and released. The worst scenario came starting in 1969, when the Somali army seized power and adopted scientific socialism, which was the Soviet communism in disguise. The Somali people, particularly those in the north, could not digest this as everything was nationalized, and people were subjected to harsh means of living.